he had an uncanny way of pushing himself over the edge of his own most recent thinking into original territory. I was greatly inspired by this and moved. It was as much by that attitude and that activity as by his actual theory, which we
Hmm.
debated and talked about and so forth. But nevertheless, he set an extraordinary example of someone who never thought, "Oh, I've said it." Um, he felt he had to both revise and refresh at every stage.
Ed Casey, thanks so much for joining me once again on the podcast. It's really great to see you again.
Glad to be here, Brian, and to move into a commemorative session on Hillman and philosophy. That's really the overall topic for today's session. Um, I met James Hillman when he was flat on his back on a floor. That was literally the first time we ever conversed. He was perfectly lucid. Um, we had quite a good discussion, though we'd never met before. And he had just given a 3 hour lecture at Yale, and he was so exhausted after that lecture that he felt he had no choice but to lie on his back and recuperate.
Well, let's give a little context. So, are you talking about the Terry lectures at Yale that served as the basis for revisioning psychology?
Yes, 1972, those lectures were given, and I heard about them almost accidentally and was intrigued. And so I went over to hear this. It was actually, they were given in the same building where I had an office on the sixth floor.
Hmm.
He was down on the first floor, and there were like 60 people had assembled, which is rather extraordinary considering that Hillman was not well known at that historical moment.
He'd
This
been doing
is,
his thing over in Zurich and had published Suicide in the Soul and Emotion, but over on stateside, he wasn't so well known yet.
no, he really wasn't. That made it all the more remarkable that that many people showed up actually for his talks. It's a three-part series. This was only the first one, but I was very intrigued by what he said. I didn't expect this. Hadn't read nothing by him. In fact, I'd heard very little about him. But somehow this is the first of the Terry lectures, and you're right, it became revisioning psychology. The next year, he was appointed in the psychology department. I had something to do with that, just because I was hoping to learn more from him and interact with him more fully. And so we our second place of being connected was on Chapel Street in New Haven, Connecticut. Um, there was a coffee house that we would meet at. And one time we were there, and he had a manuscript, 20 or 30 pages. He wanted to just briefly show it to me. Then we talked about other things for a while. We got up and left. And then Hillman realized that he had left the manuscript. We went back into the restaurant. He was nowhere to be found. And some of the owners of the restaurant said, "Oh, it's probably in the trash." So we actually went first to the trash for the restaurant, and then we went onto the street looking at various trash bins. We never found it. It was never found. It was a curious beginning of our friendship over loss, with loss.
Yeah. So you had an office at Yale. So you were part of the faculty at that time
Yes, yes. Uh,
and teaching philosophy.
Yeah, and more particularly, I was focusing on phenomenology. Um, though I was teaching, all areas of philosophy too, as assistant professors are supposed to do. And so um, I never taught a course in psychology, not in those years, not at all. But I was beginning psychoanalytic training at an institute close to New Haven. It was ruthlessly Freudian.
Hmm.
Uh, that was okay for me for a while. I grew up in Topeka, Kansas, where the famous Menninger Clinic is located. And the Menninger Clinic, psychiatric clinic, was really took its lead from Freud. And my father was the lawyer for that whole institute in Topeka. So I was intrigued by psychoanalysis. It seemed to be something that and people were coming from all over the world to be in Topeka and give a lecture, Margaret Mead among them. So that began an early curiosity about psychoanalysis, and that's why I entered into this training, which I in fact completed, though I've never practiced.
Hmm.
It's just as well. For future patients, I am a philosopher. I'm really not a therapist. Um, I sometimes need therapy, but that's not the same as giving therapy.
Were you interested? I don't know if you've ever read it, but Irvin Yalom's book, The Schopenhauer Cure,
No.
where he calls it like a teaching novel, and so it's a fictional account of a guy who's trying to develop a philosophical psychology. And I wonder if that's something that you were kind of interested in, like how we could apply philosophy to everyday life and people's problems. Was it something like that?
Well, it was very much like that. So I was practicing a brand of phenomenology. I had learned about it. I spent 2 years in Paris in the mid 60s, and had taken courses by people who were the original practitioners of phenomenology. And phenomenology, loosely put, is the effort to valorize the everyday experience that humans have, particularly as they experience it through their bodily enactment and connection with the surrounding world, the Umwelt. So that was something I was drawn to already a long time before. Jim Hillman knew about it. He hadn't really studied it. He was intrigued by it. We talked about it. And I presented it to him as an alternative to depth psychology of the kind that he was practicing. He was not convinced. It took him 25 years to be getting a little more serious about phenomenology, though it came up often in our conversations.
Because, well, depth psychology at that time, coming out of Freud and even Jung, I guess, uh, people come with presenting problems, and then the analyst might be looking back to the past to look for sources in the past as to why this phenomenon is arising, like what we call emotional triggers now, or kind of negative associations and things like that. So it's like looking back to the past to explain the present in many ways, and then Jung expanding that into looking to the unconscious through dream work and active imagination to see what's underlying. So it's like it's looking for the cause as a way to find a solution to the problem. Do you think that's a pretty good summary of where it was at the time?
Yes, I do. Certainly, there's no question that Jung moved in that direction. And of course, Hillman in the early years considered himself a Jungian, and he had Jungian analysis himself in Zurich. But notice that that was done only after he had received his PhD in philosophy from Trinity College in Ireland. And he was there for years, and he wrote his first book, Emotion, that you have mentioned, was in fact his dissertation from Trinity College. And that book takes us in the direction that he wanted to go in, although it stayed very programmatic, I'd say, architectonic, a bit too, a bit too structured for the life of emotion in its usual vivacity and unpredictability. It's rather ironic that Jim, I call him Jim, his first book, this book, Emotion, was the very topic that has become what is likely to be my last book.
Hmm.
Uh, I call it Passion, but nevertheless, um, it took me that long, 30, 40 years, to get around to saying something about a topic that Jim Hillman had written about when he was in his early 20s. He preceded me. Let's face it, entirely. In Hillman's early work on emotion, of course, there was no trace of archetypal thinking, and certainly not of phenomenology. He was just thinking emotion out in terms of the four Greek causes: efficient, material, final, etc. And so he was trying to take emotion apart in this rather analytical fashion in that first book of his. And then it was really only after this is a phone call that should not be ringing, but unfortunately it's coming in through some, and I don't even have the physical phone to turn it off.
You can
Sorry.
just write it out if you need to. I can cut it out.
Well, yeah, you should.
Well, here's the phenomena arising at the moment. The ringing in
Yes,
the the ringing in the ears.
yes, yes, in the ears, right. I have some slight hearing problems. They're not massive, and so I have hearing aids. But a phone call like that coming in is really massive. It's much accelerated. Oh
Hmm.
well. But back to where we were at. Um, Hillman and I began to talk that next year after the Terry lectures, and then we never stopped talking for the rest of his life. Always in different settings. After New Haven, it was in Zurich. He had invited me to give some lectures there on archetypal imagination, and that really consolidated our friendship, no question about it, such that we then tried to find occasions of overlap, geographic overlap, meeting in Dallas when he was at the Dallas Institute,
Hmm.
or I gave some further lectures. And then, actually, this is a little bit about the actual topography of my friendship with Jim. Then in Sweden, where he invited us to an island that belonged to his first wife's family. And there we really got in some deep talks that lasted sometimes till dawn, realizing that we had a lot of convergent interests, but that we were nevertheless very different in our approaches. Uh, by the time Hillman returned to America, he had decided to move to Connecticut, as Thompson, Connecticut, and I was living in Guilford, Connecticut at that time. So it really facilitated our getting together. He would come to Guilford, I would go up to Thompson, an easy ride, just an hour or so. So life kind of brought us together in various ways, none of which were really planned carefully. It was a fortunate conjunction, you might say. It started by accident, and it continued that way for at least 40 years.
Hmm. Can we go back to those Terry lectures? I'm wondering, what was it about that first lecture that struck you, coming from your background in phenomenology? Did you find a resonance with what he was speaking to?
Oh, yes, I really did. And that's because a second theme beyond Jungian thought as such, archetypal psychology theory, has to do, and it really did, in fact, draw us together powerfully. That topic was one you know well, Brian, imagination, archetypal imagination. Um, For some reason or other, Hillman was always intrigued by the power of the image. Um, I had written a book independently of Hillman that before I even heard the Terry lectures called Imagining a Phenomenological Study.
Hmm.
And Hillman was a guest in my house in Guilford, and a few copies of that arrived. In fact, it was just getting published. And I'll never forget his enthusiasm. He, he jumped with joy. He said, "Wow, phenomenology of imagination. Now, this is where we need to go." So that was a bond that lasted a long time.
Let's talk about that, the phenomenology of imagination.
Yes,
Taking it as it comes, taking it seriously, taking it as real.
right. And really asking where it fits into classical categories of the mind. It's clearly not intellectual. It's clearly not sensory as such. It floats, now talking about imagination, floats creatively back and forth between these levels. And it is always, as it were, on its way to liberation from being stuck in emotion, matter, whatever it is that makes our life difficult. Um, Imagination can take us elsewhere. So it's liberatory in this regard, but it also has structures of its own that I tried to bring out in this little book on the phenomenology of imagination. Um, I had written my dissertation on Bachelard and Heidegger when I was in Paris, and Bachelard has really got me into the power of imagination. His book on the elements was also a favorite of Jim's. So we connected there too. We really found ourselves pursuing the actual commonality of imagination in philosophy versus imagination in psychology, in archetypal psychology in particular. So all none of that was planned. All of it was fortuitous. It and I felt like it was a gift to me. I had not ever met a Jungian analyst or even a Jungian of any kind. Actually, it just wasn't on my playbook in those years. And this, of course, really, once I realized how serious and original a thinker Hillman was, I thought, okay, we need to go back to the sources. So that's why I really got into Jung and why I was delighted to give lectures at the Jung Institute. They were on imagination. In fact, they were titled Toward an Archetypal Imagination. Um, they were never published, except maybe some part of it in spring, a long time ago. We're talking about we're talking about some period that I was in my 50s, I guess. Now I'm in my 80s. So it was a while ago, and over that whole stretch until the day he died, um, we had a close. I wouldn't call it working relation. It was a thinking relation. We thought things out together whenever we got together.
Hmm.
I've just published a book that I think will be, if not the emotion book, book will be my last, and it's called Thinking in Transit.
Hmm.
And it's arguing that a lot of creative thought occurs when you're not at a desk and you're not at a computer, but moving, your
Hmm.
whole body moving or being moved, particularly in modes of transportation, when the mind can be liberated by that sheer lift. Uh, and it's rather extraordinary, never been fully examined. So my co-author, Megan Craig, and I tried to really take it a few steps further, but I always thought of Hillman as a person who was thinking in transit between US, Switzerland, Sweden, England, Ireland. That man was moving. And
Hmm.
as he moved, I think he thought. Um, Not that he didn't have a desk. I remember it very well. It was on the second floor of his house in Thompson. Um, Nevertheless, I think his moving around, which was considerable, given that he was increasingly well known, had something to do with the freshness, the vigor of his thought that never got stale or repetitive.
Hmm.
Um, there's a special kind of liberation by transit or in transit that I'm now struck by, and I think Hillman benefited from that. We didn't ever theme it onto this topic at that point. We were really actually um, talking about archetypal psychology and phenomenology, which takes me back to your question of a few minutes ago. So, phenomenology is the effort to do justice to the most direct sensory modes of being in the world, largely through bodily immersion in the world. So this is not medical bodily, this is felt bodily, how we feel when we're there. And it's the great figure here was Merleau-Ponty. Um, Hillman had not really read Merleau-Ponty, so I gave him some little talks on Merleau-Ponty's work on the body. He was quite intrigued, though he never really took that over as such. He was curiously not that interested in the body, the live body. It was he was floating a little bit above that.
I'm just remembering, I'm chuckling because one of the probably last seminars that he gave at Pacifica, a couple of them were recorded. One of them is entitled Senex and Puer, and the other is the art, practice, and philosophy of psychotherapy, I believe. And
Mm,
you're in the audience for one of them. I can't remember which one it is. Probably the second one, the art and practice and philosophy of psychology or psychotherapy. And
mm,
there's a whole discussion that goes on about the body, like the
mm.
body. And he's resisting using that word, the body, as this all-encompassing generalization of whatever this form is. And he's like, I can deal with an elbow, I can deal with a knee, but the body, I don't know what the body is. Where does it begin? Is it the neck down, or is it the whole
Yeah.
thing? And then
Yes.
he asks you to chime in on it too, I believe.
I probably tried, but of course, it's not that easy to define because it's not the medical body. It's not even the physical body. It's not that it's non-physical either, but it is an extraordinary form of sensitivity um, that has to do with our being in the world as animals, somewhat, although I'm having my doubts as I get older, not maybe so advanced intelligence.
Yes, I'd agree.
At this moment in history, it's in question. But in any event,
Yeah.
um, so that
So it's
that
something
is
like when we say the body or somatic, it's something about the feeling body.
yes, and more exactly, you're heading right into it, Brian, the right area. This is what Merleau-Ponty calls the lived body. So it isn't just the physical body, although that is indeed part of it. It's indispensable, but the issue really is the lived body, how you live life, um, how you live an environment, how you move through it in a sensitive, open-minded way. And this is how the body is, let's call it exploratory,
Mm.
uh, exploring any particular place or situation into which it moves.
I'm thinking about one of Hillman's pointers toward understanding what he means when he uses the word soul. He says it turns events into experiences. And when you
Mhm.
say lived body, I think about experience, not events. It's something.
Yeah.
It's a mix of our sense of the body, but also the meaning that comes from that lived experience. Emotion, affect is in
Yeah.
there in the mix.
Yes.
Maybe memories and associations. All of that kind of congeals around the lived experience of the body.
Yeah. In that sense, Brian, you could say the body is the carrier of all these modalities of human experience. It's not the author, because often we come across things we have had nothing to do with in their origin, but we are indeed creatures of the lived body because we experience the world around us, social, political, natural, environmental, through the body, in and through it, we can say.
Right, like the body is the sense organ of the soul. Is
Yes.
maybe how I'd put it.
No, that's very helpful, because I was going to say that the live body is, of course, not without um, soulful presence in the world. It isn't just the physicality of it that makes the difference. It's the way in which the body takes us into the realm of soul, and how soul is what it is, fully understood, is corporeal. It's not only mental. Um, it's it's ever moving downwards, is one way to think about it, downwards toward the earth. Currently, I'm writing a book called Land,
Wait a minute, how
inspired.
many how many last books have you got on the go here?
Well, right. Well, when you get to my age, you have no choice but to think this is your last. And then suddenly you realize, no, not quite. Um,
Still got more to say,
I
more
do
to
remember.
think.
Yes, that's right. Some more to think.
Mm,
I
great.
remember in Jim's case, of all places, being in the swimming pool on his property in Thompson.
The swimming
And
pool that Oprah bought. I think didn't he describe it that way? Because when the
yes,
Soul's Code got picked up by Oprah and it was a
yes,
bestseller, he said it bought me a swimming pool.
right. So, and it was a very good pool. And I was out there paddling along. I'm not a swimmer. I'm from Kansas. Water we never saw, and not water to swim in, that's for sure. So he was swimming under in the water, down in deep. I didn't even realize it was there, and suddenly he popped up out of the water and said, "Ed, this is my last book, and it's going to be called The Terrible War,
A
or
terrible
War,
love of war.
The Terrible Love of War." Yes, he had just actually thought of that as his final project. And he actually gives some he gave some credit to the water in the pool, that he said the water somehow inspired him to think more freely
Hmm.
than he would have on that topic.
Hmm.
And the terrible love of war remains, of course, even more relevant today to the world that we are part of, and I wish it were read more
Yeah.
often by the powers that be.
Yeah. So there's an example of your thinking in transit.
Yeah,
So when we're underwater and we're able to swim well, we feel unbounded. We can move in three dimensions, up, down, back and forth, sideways. It's when the human, I think, is most free.
absolutely. Well, read chapter one of Thinking in Transit. It's all about water and swimming and diving, and the kind of special freedom and sometimes, of course, difficulty that we have in water. And so we took that very seriously. And it was the first of four. We used the four ancient elements to structure the book.
Mm,
But we
nice.
began we began with water because we really felt that was the most productive
It's the
part
best
of.
way to get things going.
Yeah, it really is. It's moving literally in every sense of the word, and it moves us to think and imagine more fully.
Well, and we're made so much of water.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Um, and it's something we have, for the most part, lost sight of, as you know. I mean, and only rarely do we run into water that we can jump into or swim in, at least rarely in my experience, but I'm not seeking it out, I admit.
A
It
Kansas boy.
yeah, remains a bit of a foreign element.
Well, I mean, I was born next to a Great Lake,
Mm,
so I have a lot of early experiences of water. But I couldn't. The thing about that, we were kind of at the conjunction of Lake Ontario and the Welland Canal
mm,
in kind of a working class neighborhood there, and neither of those bodies of water were suitable for swimming. They were so polluted, so we
uh-huh,
stayed away from the water. And it wasn't until I really moved out to the West Coast that
mm.
I realized just how much of a kind of a water boy I am, and particularly I love the freshwater lakes.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna, geez, I was onto something before we got into the water. Um, that's okay. It's gone.
It may well return
It may.
from the depths of water, of whatever water you're part of now. It will arise sooner or later. It will come
Yeah.
forward.
Um, I wanted to ask you a little bit about when I was I last spoke to as part of this series, Michael Scipiora,
Hmm.
and he's a philosopher as well, and he was talking about the relationship between Hillman and Heidegger. And I was wondering, like, from your perspective, like, who would you put Hillman next to in terms of the philosophical family tree?
Yeah, good question. I think I'd put him next to several. Um, by his own admission and choice, Plato, Kant, um, Aristotle, those three were the most important philosophers. So he would often tell me. He was not impressed by Descartes, and
Definitely not.
you can imagine why not. And so,
Well, he's got a
um,
pretty good diatribe at the beginning of Revisioning Psychology, where he's like, before we get into this, let me discuss like where we're at and how we got here, and he really lays it out for Descartes.
yes, yes, no, Descartes the enemy. There's no question about it.
Mm.
But in terms of the 20th century, I think he had a very rich mix of people he came to read, and sometimes almost under gunpoint from me, as telling him he'd better read it, or depth psychology will miss a dimension. And these figures were like Bergson, um, Whitehead,
Mm.
and at my insistence, late in his life, um, I convinced him the contemporary French thinkers were indispensable, and in particular, three. Foucault. Um, Foucault was very meaningful to him because of Foucault's great work on prisons and incarceration, and he found that powerful and moving. And beyond Foucault were Deleuze and Guattari, um, two thinkers who will never be popular because they're very dense. Um,
Mm. Hmm.
but he recognized in their work a companion, a soul mate. Um, that, for example, they distinguish between smooth space and striated space, and argued this
And
is not,
strident space,
no, striated, striated,
striated.
yeah. So
That's a new
striated,
word for me.
well, it just means something be like a flat surface onto which you would then put linear configurations. Those are the striata, the lines that you would put on there. And so they argued that too much of our life is built around not only spatial but temporal striata called time zones or called time of day. And you and I, to converge on this very podcast, had to converge in striated space called 2 o'clock on the East Coast. Um, so smooth space is a space of creativity, of moving effortlessly, moving into your thought and beyond your recent thinking into new thinking. And Hillman was always interested in that. He never wanted to go back and repeat himself. And so he had an uncanny way of pushing himself over the edge of his own most recent thinking into original territory. I was greatly inspired by this and moved. It was as much by that attitude and that activity as by his actual theory, which we
Mm.
debated and talked about and so forth. But nevertheless, he set an extraordinary example of someone who never thought, "Oh, I've said it." Um, he felt he had to both revise and refresh at every stage.
Yeah, and continue. I mean, I think this came up maybe when I was speaking with Rick Tarnas, pointing out the re part of revisioning and how that's set apart with that hyphen. I think to emphasize it. And
Mhm.
for Hillman, the re is so important. And I also, it occurred to me when we were speaking about that, that the ing part of revisioning is also really significant in that it's ongoing. It's continual. And when I listen to Hillman in these public lectures, I'm often struck by his courage and humility in being able to show himself thinking on his feet, and
Mhm.
calling on you, and you'll interject with something, and he'll pause and he'll go, yeah, I've got to think about, I've got to give that one a think. Not
Mhm.
not ready to come to any conclusion, not not taking it as a challenge and defending, but really open and willing to expand and to,
Yes,
yeah, think on his feet.
yes, literally so. I mean, he was he was thinking on his feet, not in transit at that point, but right there in the lecture hall, which you remember well from Pacifica, right? It was almost theater. There was a
Hmm.
stage, and Hillman really got into teaching at Pacifica in the last part of his life, and it was, I think, a happy marriage. His papers are in the archives, and that is material that still needs to be read. Some of it is extraordinary, but unpublished. That is just handwritten manuscripts. In the little book that I edited called Philosophical Intimations, I include several of those pages, pictures of them, to
Hmm.
indicate how his mind on a given topic would move all over the place, though never in mere confusion or disarray, but leaping over settled boundaries and borders. He was into new territory whenever he could, and would often write it out privately on his own. I don't know where he did it. It could have been on a train. I hope it was, because that would fit with my theory of thinking in transit. But it was remarkable that he moved from these handwritten notes of just small pages into typing, and then, of course, to revising. So every bit of writing had several stages. It was never just one effort. That accounts, I think, for a lot of the nuance,
Hmm.
which we both appreciate when we read him.
Yeah, and I always get the sense too when reading him, and this is something as a someone who kind of despises or is repelled by academic dry writing, that so much of psychology and philosophy is made up of this stuff. Whenever I read him, I can hear his voice. So I always get the sense that when he was writing, he was actually writing to perform it, to speak it.
Mm.
And you can hear him in his recorded lectures that he's reading from things that would later be refined and published as kind of quote unquote finished works. Although, like you said, I don't think they were ever finished, because when he revisits them, he's often revising his own thought on the
Yeah.
spot as well and going, oh, I said that then, but maybe I should rethink that, or maybe I was a little too hard on this person or this idea, like humanism, for instance, or maybe Heidegger.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so it was always about the kind of the oral tradition, I think, in the end, the sound of language and the cadence and the playfulness. And that really comes through even in the printed published work.
Well, you could call that a poetic urge, which he really certainly had. He never was a poet, although on several occasions he would send out little poems that he would send to friends. He sent me a little poem, I think it was on my 50th birthday, um, which was all about looking at yourself in the mirror and realize you're getting older, but nevertheless you are yourself in that mirror. I wish I'd kept it, or probably somewhere in my papers. But he was not primarily a poet. It's just I think he'd like to engage in this once in a while on special occasions. I'm a painter in addition to being a philosopher, and we had a lot of discussions about that. And his wife was, of course, an extraordinary painter and a fully professional painter. I'm an amateur, but it nevertheless supplements what I do as a thinker. And in some strange marriage, it kind of works for both. And
Mm,
Hillman was very interested in that and would often point out to me, for example, when we were in Sweden, that there would be a particular cliff on this island, which if you got to it, you had just this incredible panorama of the ocean with Sweden, the land at the edge. And he said, Ed, you have to paint this. This calls for painting. And so it was, I think he was intrigued by the fact that I was not a so-called pure thinker, a formal, stringent, um, doctrinal thinker. I had an open edge that I think he appreciated through painting. Um, because for Hillman, let's think about it, the image is supreme, and painting is actually the production of images. So this is consistent with his view that life starts and ends with images, not just with thoughts, not just with sensations, but with concrete images of ourselves, our environment, and so on. I've been doing some work recently on the power of place in people's lives. For some reason, philosophers have ignored it. I think they regarded it as too obvious or too discussed. But I regarded it as a powerful notion, and Jim and I would often talk about it. He agreed with the general thesis that we are indeed products of the places of our lives. Um, but he never went there himself, and that was fine. That was one of the healthy things about our friendship, is there was no insistence that the other person follow a particular path.
mm.
Not even, an obvious major path like Jungian psychology. We'd talk about it, but he was not interested in my saying, I'm a committed, you know, Jungian. I think he appreciated the fact that I never moved in that direction, particularly not in psychology. Um, in
Well, it would probably,
psychology,
I think being the outsider has an important role in that you offer a perspective from outside let's say the philosophical system or the doctrinal system, as it were. And so if he's always interested in the new and revisioning and refreshing, to have someone in his circle who's just a little bit out, that those Venn diagrams overlap somewhat, but you're kind of in your own space, that you could offer something to further his own thinking.
yeah, and I think that's a large part of it, Brian. I think, on the other hand, I mean, supplementing that was he just liked to talk seriously, talk turkey. And I remember in the house in Thompson, in the last 10 years of his life, I'd come, they'd invite me to dinner, but he wasn't so interested in the food. He was interested in talking, which we went on for hours after dinner with this. Um, Not in order to reach a final decision on anything, but to keep a topic open. Um, he had a special genius, I think, for not closing down, but ever opening into new directions, new even to himself. And so even in his later years, he was thinking new thoughts. There can be no question about it. He kept himself effervescent, we might say, in that regard.
Hmm.
And that's why his writing is, so extraordinarily diverse, lively. I'm always amazed when I pull down the collected volumes. I was going to review a lot more of them, but they're all in Santa Barbara at the moment. I'm in New York City, so I can't give a scholarly presentation of his work, and probably just as well. And he would be turning over in his grave if he thought I was trying to sum it all up in 4 sentences.
Yeah, well, maybe I can ask you, what do you think Hillman's thought, what it offers philosophy? Anything
I
new?
Yeah, yes, I would definitely say new. And what's new is how to reconsider soul in a productive, creative way, and not to have left it with, let's say, the Greeks or other cultures where, of course, it plays a valid and important role. But Hillman really is attempting to urge us, contemporaries, to not just find soul, but to enter into soul. And so, soul work, in my view, that's the most extraordinary contribution. Um, it's deconstructing the notion of a transcendental, autonomous soul and arguing for soul as always moving, changing. It's ahead of us, even as it is us. Um, so, I I think that's where I'd go with that.
Hmm. Well, just
Um,
to pause on that for a moment, I mean, I think this aligns with my own feeling of soul at this stage of my life, thinking that maybe our purpose is to allow soul in enough that our personality more and more reflects soul as we age, like bring those more into alignment, or allow the personality to be more formed by soul or more transparent to soul so that soul can shine through. That's a tongue twister, but
that's all right. Right.
I don't know, how are
Well,
you feeling about that?
yes, it's important to me too because I'm retired and a couple of years ago, and I'm really attempting to situate myself. Not easy for someone who's been such, a fierce academic for so many years. And I think of it as actually expanding my soul uh, outwards to include parts of the world that, frankly, I had neglected in my writing and teaching. And this is what we call the natural environment. Currently living across from Central Park. So every day, not today, I was trying to write some notes for our meeting and think through some things, but otherwise, this is the northern part of the park, which is actually the wild part that many people never get to. And I realized that when I'm out there walking, my soul, however you may wish to define it, nevertheless, I would call it soul, reaches out, connects, appreciates, and enters into the natural world in an extraordinary way that philosophers have failed to adequately assess. Bergson may have come closest. Bergson had the notion of elan vital,
Hmm.
vital life, as a central notion. And I remember Jim expatiating on this and saying, we have to continue this today and rethink it in our time because of climate change, which became a real concern of his in his last years. He was very worried and very aware of the dangers of climate change.
Mhm.
Um, and it was something that he felt it would be It's very difficult to make a difference, but on the other hand, you have to at least be aware of it and then move to different practices.
Yeah, like yeah, I mean, in revisioning, he has a passage where he talks about denial, and I think that's a big area of denial for
Yeah. Yes.
certain segments of people, anyway, in the modern West.
Well, too many. Let's put it that way. That's
Yeah,
for sure. Right.
right.
Well,
Can you expand a bit on Bergson's idea of the élan vital? Like,
well,
yeah, how do we understand that?
we understand it as a form of vibrancy, of powerful currents moving through us that are not ours alone or ever even in the beginning or the end, but coming from the natural world and are both experiencing that and then expressing that in our lifestyle. And so Bergson really was the first fully environmental philosopher, um, which is kind of extraordinary. And Jim loved his work, and we talked about it a lot. That he was way ahead of his time. You know, we're talking about writing back in 1906 to 1910, which is really when he put forth the idea of élan vital. This is moving through us. It's animating us. It's energizing us, even though it is not any part of us, or it cannot be reduced to anything you would call a physical object or a set of physical objects. It's a force. That's why élan is really a powerful word in French. It really means a force moving out, hence the E of élan. And so that intrigued Jim because he realized that we move not only toward archetypes, but we move toward elemental presences in the natural world. That's why he took long walks every day in the fields around Thompson. Actually, I couldn't even keep up with him, although he was 15 years older than I. These are very robust walks, and I think he told me that he experienced the equivalent of élan vital in these fields, just not far from his house in Thompson, that he felt energized in an extraordinary way that cannot be reduced to good exercise or merely that. It's something deeper was happening.
Yeah. Well, I remember coming across that term élan vital like years ago, and as a yoga practitioner, I thought, well, oh, he's talking about prana. And this is the goal of yoga. One view of it, anyway, is to free up the flow of prana throughout the body, and a lot of that happens through the breath, and of course, kind of removing those kind of constrictions in the body, but through the
Yes.
breath and get the breath flowing. And there's this interesting thing about prana is that it's associated with air, with breath, but also something more subtle, which is that life force quality of it. Like food
Mhm.
has prana in it, as well as the air has prana in it. So there's this kind of like interesting dual definition of prana, like or two levels to it anyway, the gross and
Well,
the subtle, you know.
and I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Oh, the
Right.
gross and the subtle, like
Oh, yeah,
physical air, but also what the air contains and brings to us.
yeah. Well, it's really a form of vitality, and it's all over the place, except that human beings are very good at ignoring it or repressing it. Um,
We're taking it for granted
yes,
until
exactly.
it's gone.
I think had Jim lived, he would have really become an environmentalist, in a major way. He was heading there, um,
Hmm.
but he didn't start getting there until his 70s. And he just didn't live long enough to spell this out. But I think that's where he would have gone, in my view. Very likely. It's a
Well, I
sense,
mean,
yeah,
he played an interesting role. I mean, he was a city boy born in Atlantic City, right? And
yes,
something about his work, like his work on the city, on like civic planning and architecture and things like that, even on traffic, you know. there was something about bringing the a naturalism to the urban environment, because for him it was wrong to make a distinction between the city and nature, and so he was trying to get people to appreciate the city and then to pay more attention to the aesthetics of the city and the effect that the aesthetics of the city have on us as aesthetic animals.
Yes, very good. I think he was very aware of the citified soul, we might call it. What happens to the soul in the city. Um, we do not entirely leave behind us the natural world. In fact, cities have what are called a word we never pause to think more about, parks. As I just mentioned, Central Park is salvational to me. It's extraordinary that this would make such a difference. It just shows that we've lost touch with elan vital, and we need to regain it however we can. Walking is a start. There's more that could be done. Um, and walking was really where Jim was going until his latest phase when he just no longer could walk. And that was a real loss for him. It really was exactly what he hoped would not happen, but began to set in his early 80s. That's what
Right,
happened.
he had cancer in the pelvis, I believe.
Yeah, right. And he was finally diagnosed. For a long time it wasn't quite figured out, but yes, in the last phase of his life. But
Well,
another
gosh, no one would say it was a tragic end, though, that because he lived so much and contributed so much in his lifetime. I mean, it was a really full, what was it, 82 years, I think. My
yes.
gosh,
Oh,
if only if we could accomplish half of what he accomplished in his lifetime, you know?
well, you're right. Absolutely. And speaking of the end of life, here's an not just amusing but also telling. It's not just a story; it's the truth because I was there. So Jim, once his diagnosis was made, and once it was declared uncurable, instead of moving into mourning or getting sunk in depression, he actually hired a carpenter to create his own coffin. And he would actually be outside with the carpenter directing him as to how the coffin should be shaped. And even when winter set in, he had the coffin moved into the living room. Kind of extraordinary acceptance of death,
Did he ever, he must have tried it out.
well, oh yeah, he must have stepped in. I'm sure he did.
Or check the fit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he wanted it to be a good fit, and but I'll never forget that. It's his attitude toward radical openness. Like, okay, death. Let's think about this in some creative way. Let's build a little boat to the other world
Yeah,
across the
just like
Styx.
the ancients would have done.
Well, right. Yes, exactly.
Do you know if he wanted anything included in his coffin other than his body?
I'm trying to remember because I was around when that was happening.
I was thinking
Myself.
about that the other day, so I'm just wondering, it just come up.
Well, I can't say this for sure, but I think he wanted um, a manuscript, um, a manuscript he hadn't ever finished, actually placed in the coffin. So, in other words, as if to say, I'm moving into the another realm where maybe I can finish this.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I heard of that. Um, some family photos, and other mementos.
Hmm.
Um, Nothing extraordinary. I mean, it was all what any of us might do. Um,
But clearly thinking about an afterlife, like the Egyptians would include things from the person's lifetime so that they would have it on their journey and right?
yes, yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that Jim believed in an afterlife as such. I mean, he wouldn't reject it. On the other hand, I don't think he was counting on it as such. he just wanted to die a good biological death, and what will happen
Hmm.
after that. Um,
Did he?
by the way, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering if I mean, you mentioned that Terrible Love of War, he said it was going to be his last work, but, I know with someone like him, much like yourself, you never stop thinking. So I
Mhm.
wonder, like near the end, what ideas was he thinking about? Was there anything that was really grabbing him? And
Well, one area, and I claim small bit of credit for it, was a number of people, and not just myself, were concerned that archetypal psychology didn't say enough about the political, um, social, and so on. And I insisted, because I'm a Francophile, that he start reading Foucault,
Mhm.
who was, really brilliant on social masses and crowds and so on. Uh, and he resisted at first. He said, "Oh no, he's just one of those fancy French guys. I don't need to, I don't need to read that stuff. It's just a matter of a fashion or a fad." Well, he did actually start reading Foucault, and he said, "Wow, this guy." He read particularly Foucault's book on prisons, and he was deeply moved by it. He said, "Now this is first-rate thinking, and it is something that archetypal psychology should be taking more account of. That is the actual effect of whole groups of people as they live together, move together, protest together, whatever."
Hmm.
Um, and so we could call this a move to de-individuation
Hmm.
of archetypal psychology. Um, it's also found, and this is something that Mary Watkins, my partner and another a friend and admirer of his, calls liberation psychology,
Yeah. Yeah.
where
Mary and I have talked about that, what she calls her two intellectual fathers, Paulo Freire and James Hillman, and how liberation psychology and imaginal or archetypal psychology really have a lot of the same core values, I would say.
yes, yes, absolutely, yeah, and he was listening,
Hmm.
he took it seriously, and that was one of the great traits of Jim's. That no matter how much he knew or how much he had written on a topic, he was always open to serious critique and really wanted to talk about it and talk it through and see how it affected his thinking. I found that extraordinary. There was just no dull moment. Um, and
There's
his,
that puer aeternus quality, right?
yeah, right. Yes, yes,
Never resting on your laurels or, staking your claim and sticking to it and defending it,
yes.
repeating ideas over and over, which gets so boring with so many thinkers, for me anyway.
Well, no, it's true, and you're right about that. No, the puer aeternus, Jim Hellman was something like that, an eternal youth, Even in old age, it didn't seem to matter. His mind remained vibrant, and able to be self-critical, as well as understanding what social dimensions of psychoanalysis, indeed being in the world, period, amount to. So I consider that part of his genius, his ability to move in new directions, um, pointed out by
But
friends or whatever. Yeah.
but he's following his own work on Senex and Puer and how they're kind of two halves of the same archetype. Um, Always moving forward, but never leaving behind the past.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And always kind of like looking back, but bringing that into the present or the future. And so he's never leaving behind the past. And also, although he was always like thinking on his feet, like you said, he would rework things. Like he sat down at that old manual typewriter and pecked things out, like in a very kind of Senex manner. Never got, on into the computer and the Apple and more efficiency and quickness. So that Senex, that black iron typewriter was there.
Yes.
You know,
You wonder what he'd say about AI. I can't believe he would be a fan.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that a lot as I do my own critique of AI. I'm often calling on what Hillman said about, previous technologies and how,
Mm.
my kind of standard line about AI, my warning to people is that anytime you outsource your thinking or creativity to AI, you're giving up a piece of your soul.
Yeah.
And
Yes. Very good.
I think it's really actually kind of scary how much people are taking it up and feeding this thing. And so, yeah, you know, I've been, as I have these conversations with people, I often like toward the end, I think, I want to ask this person in front of me who knew Hillman what he might think of AI and what's going on now with people like Elon Musk trying to get to Mars and all of that.
I think he would be supremely skeptical. I really do. Worried about the very things that you're mentioning, that it takes away our own thinking, turns it over to a machine. It just happens to be very efficient and convincing. It looks like, new thinking, but of course it's not. It's programmatic in some deep sense.
Hmm.
No, I think Jim would be one of the fiercest critics of AI. That would be my suspicion.
Mm. Well,
But yeah,
there's that part about the kind of, is it intelligence or is it the artifice of intelligence? But kind of following on Hillman and his influence on me, I wrote an article recently on I entitled it "The Anti-Aesthetics of AI," and just
mm,
how as an aesthetic person, an artist, how the both the visuals and the AI music that's created, I have a real negative response to it. And so I get
mm,
into his idea of aesthesis and that that intake, that
mm.
that deep breath in, taking in the world, taking in the image. But how my
Yes,
response to so much AI stuff is a kind of a cringing, a clinching up to, and the way I look at it is my soul is is saying no, I don't want to take this in.
yeah. No, I want to do it myself, or I want to think it through myself, even if it's less efficient and even if it's inaccurate. Still, it's an expression of my soul, and not of that of this apparatus. No, it's of course a very serious philosophical as well as practical question of our time. And it's sad that Jim is not around to ruminate about this. He'd have some things to say. Mostly, I suspect, skeptical, critical. But knowing him too, he would also find archetypal significance in it. Nevertheless, um, so this would be something had he lived, he would have gone on to say a lot about.
Yeah, I'm
If
sure he wouldn't have just dismissed it, but wanted to
yeah,
understand, like, well, why is this becoming so appealing to people now? And for me, it's just like the accumulation of the anesthetic over the years that I think people have become less and less sensitized to artwork, music, writing, thought with soul. And
right,
so they're kind of primed to accept this thing as some kind of superior intelligence, more efficient
right,
intelligence, because they've lost that aesthetic sensibility that
yes,
signals, okay, this thing is real, it's got soul, it's got meaning, it's got depth.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, very good. In fact, it's the paradigm of soulless efficiency.
Yeah,
But
right.
yes, of course, it's useful. Yes, of course, it's handy. We all use it sooner or later. Sometimes, of course, we don't even know we're using it.
Yeah.
But of course, that's part of the deceptiveness of it all. But no, it's not the thinking that you do yourself and with others. But in any case, what I would call new thinking.
Hmm.
And Jim Hillman was a genius at bringing new thinking out. Going all the way back to those Terry lectures, I realized, wow, this guy is giving us a new way of understanding the unconscious and depth psychology. It was present, from the very first moment when I was spellbound in the audience and rushed onto the stage. I'm running full cycle here in my stories.
Yeah, great.
And I said, well, Dr. Hillman, do you mind if we talk a bit? And he said, I'd love to talk, but first of all, let me lie down on the stage. It's a big stage. And he flattened out literally on his back, and we had our first talk about imagination, of course. Right.
Well,
So he may have been flat on his back, but his mind was never flat, and it was always robust and creative. And that's why we're meeting today. And that's why your whole series, I think, is a wonderful tribute to Hillman's genius,
yeah.
unmatched.
Yeah, he's still he's my favorite, and I'm continually excited when I pick up. I mean, revisioning one of his oldest works and the one I've kind of reread the most. Every time I go back, there's something new for me in it, and that's
Yes.
remarkable. It really is. I think he was really channeling something there that maybe like, the way Jung talked about his Red Book formed the
Mm,
basis
yeah.
for everything he did later, and his career was really about unpacking everything that was given to him in that
Yes.
period. I think very much the same because I think it's all there in revisioning.
Yeah, there's an incredible amount there. I was so fortunate to have been around. I mean, the original form of it was in the Terry lectures, and then during that next year, when he was teaching in the psychology department at Yale, he was revising it in ways that you and I are finding incredibly useful and insightful for today. And that's, of course, a while ago, but nevertheless, he was onto something. And it had to do with soul, image, um, not really with body. Well, that's the phenomenological contribution, but
Mm.
you can't do it all. You can only do a few directions, right?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think he said this at different times that the reason why he was so focused on soul was because it was still being left out, and so he
Yeah,
kind of had to take up this, what would you call it, the mantle or the firebrand, like this was his cause, and
mhm.
he knew that other people would apply archetypal thinking to somatic work or technology or whatever it was, and people have.
Yeah,
But his thing was like to, come out and revive soul in the world and in our psychologies and philosophies.
yes,
And I don't
yes.
think the work's still not done. That's why I feel so compelled myself, being kind of called into this work as a servant to soul.
Well, it's great. This series you're doing here, I mean, this is a real contribution, not only to Hillman scholarship, but really to a whole way of living and thinking
Hmm.
that the world still needs and would profit from, if only.
I think more
Uh,
than ever,
yeah,
with
well,
technology becoming so, I
yeah,
mean, it's everywhere. And
well,
you remember I said that when we started talking about water, there was something there that had left me. It did come back.
yes,
I was thinking about the relationship between technology and water and how a lot of these silicon chip-based technologies really don't like water and they don't get along with water very well. I spilled
uh-huh.
water on a keyboard just a couple weeks ago and it totally ruined the thing.
Oh my,
And
right.
so
Wow.
water as a kind of sanctuary from the technological, you
Yes.
know, air, like with the technology, I feel there's a lot of like kind of air and fire element.
Yeah. No, no, really, there is.
Water's going to slow things down or even disrupt.
Right. Well, I wasn't here to even mention my book, but I do have a look. It's all about such things: water, air, fire, earth. Um, the book called Thinking in Transit, which has just been published, a short book. You'll be relieved to
Oh,
hear.
thank you.
So, right. Mary writes very long books, but very, very important books, like
Is
her
it
last.
is Thinking in Transit, is that published by Spring or someone else?
No, published by Columbia University Press.
Oh, okay.
It's a small paperback. It's even reasonable. It's, I think, only $19 on Amazon, which is extraordinary.
For a
So,
university press, yeah. Hmm.
yeah, right. Yeah. Well, spread the word. Thank you, Brian. Um, Sell a
Yeah.
few copies here and there.
Yeah, we'll see what we
Um,
can do.
right. but there are
Well,
many good books out there.
Ed, this has been so great, and I mean, I don't even think I realized that you were there at the genesis of this book, at those lectures, especially that first one.
Oh
And
yes,
so
oh
it's a
yes.
real honor and real pleasure to have you here and telling us some stories and talking about Hillman's contribution to Western philosophy.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm really delighted to be here. I mean, this is like the oral equivalent of what in writing I put together and under the heading of philosophical intimations. These are all of Jim's writings that are really highly philosophical in character. It's part of the collected edition. It hasn't got much notice, but it was an effort on my part to put together many of the topics that you and I have discussed today. His early writings or late writings, I try to really put them into one coherent volume called Philosophical Intimations. That was our last disagreement. He said, "Well, Ed, I mean, he was sinking down, but said, why don't you call this book Philosophical Reflections?" And I said, no, I'm going to be stubborn. I'm going to call it Philosophical Intimations. Somehow that fit Hillman's work better, I thought. Um, intimation.
Yeah, because intimation to me is related to intimacy, so the inner experience. Reflections, it's surface.
Yeah, right. Thank you. I should have had your argument. You should have been there.
He might have
Anyway,
gone, oh, you got a point there.
yeah, I think so. Right. Well,
Well, it's so
again,
great. We'll see
thank
if we can sell some books. And yeah, I've got a lot of notes here, things to add for people to follow up on. I'm going to put some of those things that you mentioned, some of the people and books that you mentioned in the show notes, so that people can follow up and go down some of these rabbit holes that you've uncovered. Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, my pleasure, and thank you for talking with me, and particularly the whole series, which is a gift to the world.
Thanks. I'd really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you down the road. Hey.
Right. Okay. Greetings to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You
All
too.
right.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.